That will never work. You can't fuck with yourself. Seriously? Don't. Oh my God, that's everything. That's bad. You probably should find other hobbies. You ever learn how to stop? Stop. Be happy. You don't bother me. Do you really want to do that? And my third grade, give it up. Welcome to Horrible Writing, the rawest, most candid, in-your-face writing show on the interwebs because none of us have time to suck. Let's do this. So, as writers, there's a lot of things that we struggle with, a lot of struggles that we face, a lot of barriers to us living our dreams. One of the more serious, one of the more devastating ones is chronic illness. This episode of Horrible Writing, I have an absolute phenom of a writer on to talk about that. Welcome to episode 106 of Horrible Writing. I'm your host, Paul Sading, and boy, do I have a great episode for you this time around. With me to talk about writing through chronic illness is Kristine Kathryn Rusch, sci-fi fantasy writer, New York Times, USA Today best-selling author, and a lot of you know her because of her incredibly awesome business-centric blog for writers. Chris, welcome to Horrible Writing. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking me, Paul.
I am so thrilled to have you, and I'm so honored that you are willing to come on to the show to share a really personal side of your writing journey. Folks who have been on the along with this show since the beginning or for a long time, they know we love to talk about the author's journey, not as an author, but as a human being who just happens to put words on paper for a living or for out of passion. And when you said that you would be willing to talk about this, I was just absolutely floored and honored because I think it's something so important. We've got a lot of listeners. I've already kind of teased them that this was coming, and they were so excited, and they are still excited because they won't hear it for a month, to find out what you have to say about this topic. So I really, really, truly appreciate it. To start us off, you've got a newer book out there about it's called Writing with Chronic Illness. And I was wondering, in that book, you're really, really open about your history, your journey, but your history with chronic pain. So to kind of start us out, I'm curious, what was the motivation for you behind putting this down into book form and sharing with the world?
Well, I had a real dramatic episode in my life in 2018. I nearly died because of all the health stuff that was going on. And my husband, Dean Wesley Smith, for those of you who read the writing blogs, he got me out of where we were living and got me into a much healthier environment. And he did it. He did all the heavy lifting. And as I was talking to people about how I was dealing with stuff and how things were going on, so many of them said, I had no idea that you were ill. I had no idea that this was going on. How do you produce so much as a writer when you're that sick? And I thought, well, I'm getting that question like every fifth person I talked to, and every fifth person I talked to was a writer. So I thought, maybe I should answer it because I did have systems set up, and I still do, for how to deal with things when you're not feeling well and when it's become chronic and when, you only have a few hours in the day to do anything. So I thought, okay, let's share that. So then as I started putting the book together, I realized, well, in order to do that, I'm going to have to share my own journey just a bit because otherwise it's not going to be relevant. I do a lot of things like I run, and that's one of the things I do for my health. And I had somebody come on when I was doing the initial blogs on this say, well, I'm too sick to run. So obviously what your experiences are and mine are different. You're not very ill. And I thought, well, no, I actually taught myself how to do that while being ill to help myself feel better. And that's the kind of perspective I thought I should give people. Also, we all have a wide variety of chronic illnesses. So mine are this thing and other people's are that thing. Mm-hmm. And so they can say, oh, this is not relevant to me because I can't do that thing that Chris does. And I think that's really valuable because You have to know what you as a person can do as opposed to what somebody else can do, and not take those expectations on yourself.
Mm-hmm. In the I've throughout my life been a lot luckier than I realized I was, but that's because I'm typically, the butter knife in a drawer full of steak knives. I'm not very sharp. I've got to have life taught to me over and over before I, pick up a lesson. But there was a comment that you make very early on in the book that really kind of grabbed my attention, and it got me thinking, gee, Paul, could you actually do what you do? Because I get the same kind of comments. I'm very late in my career type of thing, Chris, compared to you. I've always loved writing since I was a wee bit lad, but you grow up, you go in the military, and Uncle Sam has a way of taking you away from everything you love for a couple decades at a time. And then you've got to get back in the rhythm. So I've always whined about the late start in life that I got getting serious about writing again. And then I have to keep things in perspective. And one of the comments that you made early on, I'd love to hear a little bit of your thoughts on it and why you decided to include this type of line, maybe even sharing your own specific situation. But you talked about how for you, bad health was the norm. And that really stood out to me because, as much as I want to complain about how tough I've got it, I've never in my life sat there and said, oh, wow, gee, I feel like crap, and that's normal. So what was your thinking behind setting that context for folks? What did you want them to understand about your situation, obviously, and then obviously how it can help them?
Well, I have learned, because I'm getting older, we all end up having challenges, and there comes a certain point in our life where either it's your health goes bad or your beloved, their health goes bad, and it does take over part of your life. And sometimes you end up with one of those challenges that, the doctor will say to you, or, the specialist will say, this is your future now. This is what's going on. And I've watched so many people say, well, I can never do my writing again. I can never do this again. And that's actually, for most of us, not true. I mean, there are certain illnesses where that is true. I have a sister with dementia, and over a certain period of time, she's not going to be able to do the things anymore that she was able to do. Mm-hmm. But, you can do it. You just have to learn how to prioritize. And you also have to be willing to jettison some things in your life. That you need to know what is the real important thing to you. My health has been bad, probably since I was really little. I have a severe dairy allergy, which all the stories that they would tell about kids, about me as a kid, I was the youngest of four, and the others are 16 to 20 years older than me. And then I had older parents, and I lived in the dairy state, Wisconsin. And, they told I was a picky eater. I was constantly sick. My stomach was constantly upset. Well, I had a severe dairy allergy that went undiagnosed until I was in my late 40s, for heaven's sake. So, that was part of my illness. I have other things that go on as well. But, so I would go for 3 days doing fine, and then I wouldn't function at all. And, probably I ate a lot of cheese the day before I had an inability to function. Who knows? But so I learned really early that if I wanted to accomplish anything, I needed to arrange everything else around whatever I wanted to accomplish. Mm-hmm. That made my friends become friends who are willing to tolerate me saying no a lot. I'm not going to do this because I only have so many hours in the day to write. I'm not going to do that because I only have so many hours in the day to actually be awake. The people who kept saying, well, that's not how you should live your life. You should be able to do what I want. Those people fell by the wayside. That's me looking in hindsight going, oh, okay, that was me coping and figuring out how to make things work. And it did. I'm just that stubborn, I guess.
And I'm glad you said that, because I'm going to address, this is Paul's perspective, obviously, but just my perception of your public image, if you will, from the wonderful things that you put out in the world to help everyone. But I want to get to that in a second, because there's these are kind of related. So it's sort of a two-parter. You talked about in the book, one of the things I was curious about was early on in your career, dealing with. I feel that this life thing comes in stages, and when we're early on, we've got to really work our butt off to establish ourselves, to earn that reputation, to open those doors, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember in my 20s how much hustle I had to do to do those things, to lay that foundation for things that would come later. For you, how easy, air quotes, was it to be that 20-something hustler when you're dealing with a chronic condition?
It was, I almost felt like I, was two different people, which, considering I'm a Gemini, that works. There would be days when I was the best hustler. I could do all kinds of stuff. I could get things done. I could get everything else done. And there were days where if the phone rang, I wanted to pull a blanket over my head. Mm-hmm. So I did not understand why I was those two things. And it took me, a good decade to figure out that, I need to plan for the person who wants to put the blanket over her head as opposed to the hustler. Because the hustling part was easy when I felt good, but it was impossible when I didn't. So I needed to work around all of that. But, that was my 20s. It was learning how to be around me. There are things that you can do that I could do that I could game myself out of. Writing is a series of mind games ultimately, and trying to figure out how to be, prolific or get productive or do things. You have to get out of your own way, and you throw up your own barriers because we're working in our heads to getting out of your own way. You have to figure out how to get over those barriers. Well, what was astonishing to me at a certain point in my life was there were certain barriers I could not jump over. I couldn't go around them. I couldn't go through them. Instead, I had to accept that they were there, make them part of my life, and then work with them, which is not my nature. My nature is to go at things as hard as I possibly can and to get them out of my way. And there were things that I simply couldn't do that with. And that was both frustrating and liberating once I figured it out.
And oh gosh, I really want to ask that question now, but I'm gonna hold off for one more because you just said something that it just reinforced this image I have of you, which, by the way, I don't want to continue to be cryptic. I actually really identify with the way you handle yourself and you communicate. It's a type of mentality and approach that I can definitely easily identify with, but I'm going to hold off for one more second because you use the phrase reluctant, delicate flowers in the book, talking about mindset. So I'm curious about that mindset reflection, and including that in the book, because, maybe this is a little unsolicited feedback. I don't see you like that in your business musings and whatnot. You're, in a good way, very candid, very raw sometimes, and talking about that being that reluctant, delicate flower. Learning, what did you learn about yourself in that phase? And then, if you don't mind sharing, what were some of the things that helped you overcome it? I guess is a way I would ask that.
Oh, I still think of myself as a reluctant, delicate flower in certain areas. And what I mean by that, and this was a phrase that another friend of mine, who is one of the toughest women I have ever met, but has severe health issues, she coined it. And it is, we are delicate flowers in that there are things that can make us just, lay down for days. Recently, I'm much healthier now that we have moved to Las Vegas, and recently I got the flu for 24 hours. Now, in the past, when I would get the flu that everybody else had for 24 hours, I would be sick for a month.
Oh, wow.
And so I have never had a 24-hour flu until just a few weeks ago. And I'm still kind of going, wow, that's no wonder people don't really care. For me, it was like I got sick, then I got really sick, and then it cascaded. So that's kind of what both my friend who coined this phrase and I came up with as we are delicate flowers, because we had to protect ourselves, use all kinds of, wash our hands more than most people, do all kinds of preparatory things, not visit with anybody who's really sick, because we would be sick for weeks after that. That meant we were delicate flowers, and this would fall by the wayside. But we never saw ourselves that way, and so to even admit that we had this delicate side, we were reluctant. But once we admitted it, then we could deal with it and kind of prevent some of the worst of it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, getting to the place where you say, okay, yeah, I have this issue and I have to protect myself from it, and I hate it. That is where the phrase "reluctant, delicate flower" comes from, and it's useful, but it's also it reflects the frustration that that I have as well. I have a T-shirt that she designed that is a piece of art of a flower standing there holding an AK-47. And underneath awesome. It says "reluctant, delicate flower."
That is absolutely epic. That is awesome. Now, you've got a big fan in the Horrible Writing let's try that again, Paul. The Horrible Writing Writer Support Group on Facebook. Fans, if you're not there, why aren't you there yet? Now, to Chris, one of the members of our group, Robert Tinsley, he's an audio dramatist, so he writes fiction podcasts. He consumes your blogs the minute they come out. I swear, I don't know how he reads that fast, because your blogs are pretty heavy, and but he does, and he shares them, and he's kind of helped the group become aware of who you are, but also, especially with the recent business serious focus on in the themes, there's been this sort of perception, which I think is real, that you don't pull any punches. You call it like you see it, which I love. In the book, you talk about something I think is very, very important for all of us to understand, especially from someone like you who has accomplished so much. In the book, you've got this side of you, the business musing side, where you just say, hey, you got to go do these things. And if you're not thinking about licenses, you've got to go, and you don't pull any punches with that stuff. But we know now what you've been dealing with for your life. We also know what you've accomplished throughout your career. And in the book, you talk about learning about, the benefits, if you will, of throwing in the towel. Can you talk about that journey? I'm assuming the younger Chris didn't necessarily want to throw in the towel, and maybe you've learned that over the years?
Oh, yeah. There were times when I wasted a lot of energy on things that I shouldn't have. And it is a learned experience. And it runs the gamut. Some of it is toxic friendships. You need to stay away from people who are going to just suck the time away from you. Some of it is you have to, on a business side of things, you look at it and you say, okay, I only have so many hours in the day. And if I get involved in, say, this lawsuit or whatever is going to happen, how many hours is it going to suck out of my day? How many things is it going to prevent me from doing? Again, it comes to that whole priority thing. What are your priorities? Mine are my family, my relationships, and then it's my writing. So if something is going to get in the way of my writing, I'm going to nip it in the bud if I possibly can. And sometimes it means I throw in the towel. Sometimes it means I have not sued certain people in my life that my lawyer is still screaming about because I had an open and shut case, but I would look at it and go, okay, I have two things here. I could make a lot of money from suing this person who's known for settling and giving you a lot of money, but also having a non-disclosure. And I can talk about this person because I didn't sign the non-disclosure. But the other side of it is that, in order to get to that a lot of money part of things, it would have taken a year's worth of back and forth in court. So I wasn't willing to do that. And, that's part of the throwing in the towel. And some of it is, what I was talking about with barriers earlier. You can go over them, you can go through them, you can go around them, but sometimes they just exist and you have to learn how to live with them. And that, for me, as a human being, that's the hardest one.
Women are being murdered. A serial killer on the loose. One reporter with a story to tell. Janice Herring is a pariah in Memphis's media circles. fired from her television job. She will do anything to get back in the game. When the city's leading newspaper offers her a chance at redemption, she finds herself writing the hottest story the city has ever seen. Soon fighting on all fronts, peers are moving in to steal the story. The police are unwilling to cooperate. And now, a strange man is stalking her. A pattern is developing in the string of murders that has Janice questioning her friends, family, and even herself. The story of the Memphis murders was going to reestablish her as the preeminent reporter in the city. But with the pressure mounting, will her new boss give her the chance? And will the killer give her the time? Rip is a second book in my Subject Found series. You can get it in ebook on Amazon or paperback and audiobook wherever you get those. Just head over to paulsading.com/rip for more information. For folks out there who really want to do this, life gets in the way. Maybe they try to write in their spare time when they can snag a few minutes, whatever, but they're dealing with something that is chronic as well. When you look back over what you've learned over the years, I'm curious. It's kind of like a two-parter. One, I just want to really open the door and ask you about tips, tools, and tactics for dealing with and writing through chronic illness. But if you could also add a rider on there, I'd really love to hear your thoughts on what you think the role of structure is as well for those writers out there who are dealing with chronic illness and they don't think they can manage both.
Well, I'm going to start in a completely different place because I like the one you ended with, which is usually where I start. But I'm going to start somewhere else, which is you have to be able to forgive yourself. Mm-hmm. You have to understand where you are and who you are on the spectrum of things. And that the people that you're looking at from the outside, you have no idea what challenges they're dealing with and, how they actually get to where they're going. And, what they have done. I'm going to give an example here of Stephen King would write books and put back in the day of traditional publishing when they thought a writer should only release a book a year and he writes 4 to 5, he would put them in drawers so that when time came and he had a bad life roll or, something bad happened, he would just pull one of the books out of the drawer. So it looked like he never had issues at all,
right.
Until that car accident. So you don't know, what people are dealing with and how they get there. What I learned by having, the chronic illness and everything else was, well, first of all, I never ever felt like I had achieved what I wanted to achieve in a day. And so, I had to learn how to set that up. But the other thing I had to learn was I had to take care of myself and my health first in order to get my writing done. And that was a decades-long struggle because to me, it looked like a waste of time to cook my own meals or a waste of time to, specific hard-to-cook meals that were better for me as opposed to, the stuff you could just get over the counter right. That you could make in 15 minutes. And learning how to exercise because the more that I exercised, whatever that exercise was, and believe me, early on, it wasn't much, the healthier I was. I slept better. I managed to do all that stuff. And it started with a Fitbit and 10,000 steps. Mm-hmm. And I had to prioritize that because that's not something you can do in 15 minutes. That's something you have to do over the space of a day. And when I was really sick, I would have to do it 15 minutes here and 15 minutes there and everything else just to get those steps. So I had to plan that. And I finally realized, oh, no, these steps were the priority. The writing was the secondary priority, which, I stomped around mad about for quite a while, which gets to your other point, which is structure. And I am a very structured person. I think some of that does come from being so ill over all the years, because if I hadn't been structured, I wouldn't have gotten things done. Now, people out there in the world who are writers have a structure imposed on them. If you have a day job or you have kids or a day job and kids, you have this structure to your day that already exists. You know that you have to get to your job at 8 a.m. Before you get there, you have to drop your kids off at school. you have to pick them up at 3 or whatever it is. And if you're like a friend of mine who used to work in the White House of all places, you want to spend those couple of hours with your kids before they go to bed. I always use him as an example because he was in the military, he was in the White House doing work there, and he would, take the train in from where he lived in Virginia to the White House, work all day at this high pressure job, take the train home, and then spend his evening hours with the kids and then go to bed. So where was his writing time? It was on the train.
Mm-hmm.
And he just found that little space on the train, which was a half an hour there and a half an hour home. In fact, he did not drive himself so that he would be able to have the train and the train time to write. That's the kind of structure that gets people to be prolific. That's the kind of structure that allows for people to be productive. Every Sunday now, I still have this habit of, I look at my week and I say, okay, what things are going to be in my week that are going to change my week from its normal, regular structure, and how do I work around that? And I decide that on Sunday, even if the thing that's going to change the structure of my week is happening on Thursday. That way I know what's coming, I know how I'm going to deal with it. And I know if I have a deadline on Friday, I may not be able to get the work done on Thursday, so therefore I need to get it all done Monday through Wednesday ahead of it.
That is awesome. And boy, I just absolutely love that example too of that's something I preach about. And one of these days, if I'm ever successful in writing, I'll be able to tout along and say, hey, I told you all back in 2017 about taking these opportunities to fit your writing in. I love that example. I just got to praise that. And that guy doing that on the train, especially commuting around DC. That's not easy.
No,
at all.
It's not.
And I'm very structured as well. I shared with my following and with the group. They haven't heard it on the episodes yet. They'll come out in the next couple of weeks. But last week, I work for a defense contractor, and last week our contract was canceled, funding issues. So we're all currently inert. We're just unemployed, figuring out what to do. And still, I got up at 4:45, first day of unemployment, just like I would for a work day, because when I worked 4:45, and I would write up until I had to literally get ready to start working. Even though in unemployment, I didn't loosen the construct of that structure, because I'm a total adherent, and I'm so glad to hear you answer that structure question like that. And if you don't mind, just two quick questions from the Horrible Writing Writer Support Group. And Chris, if you don't feel comfortable answering them, we can totally skip ahead, and you just let me know, and I can edit all that out in post-production. But
okay, I will. But before we do, let me say something about what you just said about your structure.
Yes.
First of all, I'm sorry to hear about the unemployment. I know how stressful that is.
Yes, thank you.
But second, there's something that happens when you are really structured, and you get up at 4:45 to do that work, and your brain is ready to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Your body is ready to do it. It says, okay, this is the writing time. And so if you became unemployed and said, I'm not going to get up until 9 and I'm going to start then, you would find yourself at loose ends, because your body and your brain was expecting to put out the writing at 5 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
and you waited 4 hours, and that gets really confusing. And
yes.
That's something that we train for. It doesn't seem like we're trained, but we actually are. So I wanted to add that in.
Well, and I love having your voice validate that. Again, imposter syndrome aside, because I've only been published for a year now, I don't feel like I have a lot of foundation to speak to. But one of the things I do feel heavily committed on is that behavior management and the necessity of routine and structure. And sometimes I feel like I'm shouting into the void of space, because I know people are busy, and I try to be very compassionate as a father myself. I know what it's like to have little kids, but there is still time that we can still capture to do these kind of things. And it really kills me when people will lean on that they can't. So I'm glad that you validated something that I've been telling folks for 105 episodes up to this point. So Jack Taylor is also in the group, and he's an aspiring author, and he asked about medications when it comes to this, or just in general, if medications don't cause, but he used the term brain fog. If you suffer from brain fog because of the chronic illness, and if you had any suggestions / recommendations for him and anyone else that might suffer those types of symptoms from medication and chronic illness.
Well, I had brain fog without the medication side effect.
Okay.
So yeah, I suffer from chronic migraines, which are, as the doctor told me once, they get better as you get older, which is irritating. It's like, why couldn't they be better earlier? But that would have an accompanying brain fog, and I could feel it coming, and I would know that it would get so bad that I wouldn't be able to drive. That's kind of my test. If I can't drive, then I shouldn't be writing. There are certain levels of brain fog that you can write through. And I learned how to write with migraines because I would maybe have aphasia, but it wouldn't be that horribly bad. And that's where a copy editor would come in. I would use the wrong word, and it would be a word that would be nonsensical, but I would know it would come. The storytelling was still there, but the word usage wasn't always there, and I would still do it. But I got really militant with my doctors, especially if I was having some kind of outside procedure. I had like dental procedures and stuff. I would say, because I have a very high pain tolerance, in that I'm lucky. I would say to the doctor who was handing me pain pills, I would say, did you need me to take these pain pills because they're going to reduce swelling and have all these other benefits? Because sometimes you do need to. Or are you just giving them to me for pain? And the doctor would, if it was the swelling, they would look at me very confused and say, well, it is swelling and I would prefer that you take them. But if it was just for pain, then they'd be really confused because most people don't want to be in pain. And they would say, it's just for pain. And I'm like, okay, you don't need to give me this prescription then, because I would rather be in pain and write than not in pain and not writing. Now, there are some conditions that people suffer through where they absolutely need to have the medication. And that's one of those barriers I was talking about, where you look at it and you go, okay, I can't go around this. I can't go over it. I can't go through it. This is something that's part of my life. So I'm going to get brain fog if I take this drug for this problem. Is it worth it to me to take the drug right now, or can I put it off for 2 hours and get something done? If you can't put it off, you accept it and you say, that's part of who I am. That's part of what I do. I'm done working for today. And that's how I worked through it. A lot of times, because my brain fog would come later in the day, I tried to get as much done as I possibly could in the first few hours I was awake. And then anything after that was gravy. And so you got to plan for when your brain, I cannot stress highly enough the use of calendars and charting your illness, because if you chart it, then you can see the patterns. And once you see the patterns, at 5 o'clock every day, I'm going to get this brain fog. Or, once the brain fog starts, it's going to get worse within 2 hours. So I have 2 hours to hang on until it really gets bad. And it's going to be different for everybody. And, then you work through it that way. But figure out where your windows are and use them when they show up.
That's a great answer. And I'm noticing a theme here with you that it sounds like, have to teach yourself through a lot of these barriers that you're talking about. This isn't, and I just highlight this, not necessarily for you, Chris, but for someone who may not have noticed it in the interview or hasn't read the book yet, but that you don't just fall forward. There's a lot of work that you put in, behavior modification and whatnot, to help you navigate this chronic illness that you have. That goes all the way back to when you were talking about running earlier in the episode.
Absolutely. There was a time, I have a friend who jokes that the only time she's ever going to run is when somebody's chasing her, which is something I used to say. But I hated it so much. And I decided, I started doing the 10,000 steps. And I realized that, when you walk 10,000 steps, it takes a lot more time than when you run 10,000 steps. And so I was looking at time management. I wasn't looking at trying to, learn how to be a runner. I was like, well, instead of spending 3 hours a day trying to get 10,000 steps, I can do it in an hour if I learn how to run.
I love that. Oh, the tricks we play on ourselves to get us motivated. Oh, I've got one last question before we get to our special segment here. And this comes from Julie Schill. She's a writer also in the Horrible Writing Writer Support Group. She says, I have stage 4 cancer and chronic pain. The only time I'm not in pain is when I'm writing or painting. Does Kris notice similar relief when she's writing?
Absolutely. Writing is an escape, and it has to be. Hesitate using the word fun because that speaks to a certain kind of attitude, behavior, but it has to be an escape for you, a place that you want to go, a place that brings you enjoyment, relaxation, a benefit of some kind or another, in order to do it through all of that. And if it's not working that way for you, then you need to figure out what it is that you probably put on the writing, because I'm sure you didn't start writing because it was drudgery. I think you probably started writing because you loved it, you as the overall listener. And so, if you're getting joy out of what you're doing, or relaxation, or an escape, or a place to go, then you're doing it right, in my opinion.
Agreed. All right. Now, listeners, welcome. If this is your first ever episode, I'm about to ask Kris a question that you may find odd, rude, maybe even, but I promise you, I'm not trying to be rude. What I'm going to ask Kris for is a horrible writing experience. Now, I don't want to make Kris relive any bad experience or any trauma or anything like that. There is a method to my madness. I have no idea what she's going to share. I have no idea what story is about to come, but I believe we all know where Kris is in her career, all the wonderful things she's accomplished. And she's been talking and mentioning barriers throughout the episode and some of the behavior changes and whatnot that she's done to help deal with the chronic illness. This may not even be related to that, but whatever this story is, Kris has lived it and overcome it to be who she is and who we all know her as today. So that's my reason behind that. And I want to use her story as an example of what we need to be thinking about every single time we look that person in the mirror and we say, oh boy, I didn't meet my writing goal, whatever it is, for today. So Kris, with that being said, I'd love to hear, what is your horrible writing experience?
We've been having this discussion, you and I, since you asked me to be on this podcast, because I've been doing this for 40 years. And I have so many horrible writing. I have great ones too, but I have so many to choose from. The one that stands out right now, and partly probably because I'm coming back to the books, happened with my Kristine Grayson byline, which is a very weird byline. I write fantasy romance, sort of. It's not at all what, once upon a time, it was considered paranormal romance, but it's not now. These books are funny, they're fantasy, they're sweet romances, which means that if the couple is thinking of having sex, I just gently close the door so that you don't watch. And so they were always joyful for me. I always wrote them as a palate cleanser after my Chris Nelscott books, which are very noir and dark. And so they were a lot of fun. And I was doing them initially in traditional publishing for Kensington. And then I moved, the books went out of print. I worked on other stuff for a while, and then I ended up moving to Source Books, which is another company, and they were brand new, and they were doing all this stuff, and their editor seemed fine. Now, you need to know something about me. In traditional publishing, there's something that you need to do. Usually you sell books based on the outlines you've written. Well, I'm one of these people that can't follow an outline to save my life. So, I talked to one of my early editors and I said to her, I can't do this. And she said, oh, just write them. We never pay attention to what the outline says. We just buy it and then you write the book you want to write. And it turned out to be true, at least at that time period. So in my entire career of traditional publishing, writing outlines, I only once followed the outline, just once. And that was for a Kristine Grayson book in which, I kid you not, Bluebeard is my hero. You know, the guy who murdered all his wife.
Right.
He's the hero. I told you these books are strange. Right. And I knew that one was dicey. And, so I really paid attention, followed it, did all this stuff. I got a phone call from the editor. This is after I'd been publishing a number of books with these people, and one of them had just come out. And she was calling me from a conference. Now, generally, when an editor calls you from a conference, it's with great news, like your book has hit the New York Times list or something like that. She called me to berate me for this piece of crap that I had written. She went on into how it was clear I had never written a good book. I didn't know anything about romance. I didn't know what romance was. I didn't know what fantasy was. I didn't know what any of the, and she just went on and on and on. And silly me, I listened because I was so stunned. I mean, at this point, I had been the editor of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. I'm an award-winning science fiction and fantasy author. I'm an award-winning romance author. I was just startled. I finally got wherewithal to get off the phone, and I got off the phone and burst into tears because, I'd never had anybody berate me like that.
Right.
About my writing. And ironically, and I said this to her on the phone, I said, but you approved the outline. This is the book you approved, which kind of stopped her up short. And then she went back into her rant. I got off the phone. Once I calmed down, I went over to my computer and I wrote a letter to the publisher of Source Books itself and withdrew all my writing projects with this person and offered to pay, which, I've been in publishing a long time. I knew I was offering to pay perhaps $250,000 to $500,000 in expenses on this. But I said, we will work it out. I'm leaving your company. This is unacceptable behavior, and I am not going to put up with it. And wrote the letter, sent it by registered mail, sent it by email, ended up dealing with the vice president of the company back and forth, trying to figure out what to do, because I had 4 more books coming out from this company. They moved me to another editor. We only did 1 more book, and that was the book that was in production. And slowly we've been getting the books back. This happened the same week when a really good friend died in 2011. So, this was some time ago, but not that long ago. Turns out this editor, who is still working for the company, is an alcoholic. And when she gets really drunk, she berates one of her female authors who is the most successful on her list.
Oh, no.
That's what she does. And there is an actual email support group of writers out there who talk to each other about being berated by this person. And I'm like, why don't you stand up for yourself and say, you should not treat me this way?
Wow.
Yes, indeed, it took 1.5 years for me to, get extricated from this company. And she sent me 2 emails in the middle of that time, both of which I sent to the guy and said, this is about to blow our deal because part of our deal is this person never speaks to me again. Ironically, for me, it was the only book I followed the outline on. So I could actually say to the publisher, this is the book you bought. Had it been one of those outlines that, I just tossed out, I would have said, uh-oh, we're in trouble.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So see, new writers, we all see the glory in the promise of the being published land, the promised land, and look at what awaits us. Oh, wow. That is a heck of a story, Chris. And I have to commend you. It sounds like, as horrible as that is, it sounds like you were able to handle that with tact and class that I would love to be able to mimic one day, because I don't know if I could have done as well as you in that same situation.
Oh, I don't know if there was tact and class involved. But, I did not send out an email immediately afterward or anything, with lots of swear words and that sort of thing, only because I've been in business a long time. And I learned that if I react, especially being female, if I react, emotionally to this, then I would have lost all credibility.
Right.
So going at it with, okay, here's what she said. I documented it. I sat down and documented it immediately. Here's what she said. Here's what happened. Here's what's going on. And I will not stand for this. I expected fully that they would fire her. Had she been my employee, I would have fired her.
Right.
But they didn't, and they still haven't. She's still at the company. I find that amazing, which speaks to the dysfunction of that particular company.
Right.
I've dealt with difficult editors, agents, other people in the past, and sometimes they keep their jobs and sometimes they don't. But usually you can expect business people to act in a business sort of way.
Oh, exactly.
This was completely bizarre and still is.
No, that definitely is. And folks, I was serious praising Chris about how she handled that. But for you, for the new writer, a couple lessons in that, the fact that this type of stuff exists, it is out there. But also one of the things that I see a lot from you, the newer writer, me included in that, is that we can be pushovers when people in positions of authority in the publishing industry speak. And if there's nothing else that you take from Chris's story, that's something I took from that, is to remember where your boundaries are, what you're willing to accept, and how, in terms of how you'll be treated by anyone, and to, defend those boundaries and maintain your space. That's a great story for that, Chris. And I really appreciate you sharing that. That is unfortunate, and I'm sorry you had to go through that, but wow, what a lesson for the rest of us, for sure. Now, Chris, you've given us so much time and so much of yourself, and I really appreciate it. Before we say goodbye, though, I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the work that you have out there that you would like to highlight, some of your books, whatever you would like to highlight. But in addition, I'd love to also maybe get a little clue of what we can expect from you in the future.
Well, let's do a two-parter here. I brought up the Kristine Grayson for a reason, because I've come back to it. Even though I sounded like, I was so calm and in control, that actually had an impact on me having fun with those books, because her voice was in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a while to get that out of there. And last fall, I wrote the first Kristine Grayson book in 7 years. And so we've been reissuing everything and redoing them through WMG Publishing. And I'm really excited about that. So that's the book that just came out is called Hidden Charm. And I'm really happy about it, not just because the book turned out the way I wanted it to, but because I'm back writing Kristine Grayson stuff. What's coming up is I have just released, by the time you hear this, another book in my diving universe called The Renegade. That's a huge book where I had to write something to explain something for me. So if you've never read the diving universe, which is an award-winning, worldwide best-selling universe, you can actually start with this book, because it's set way in the past of what's going on, and none of the characters are shared.
Okay.
So that's a place to start. And then right about the time this airs, we'll be doing a Kickstarter on a very special holiday project. So you may want to check that out as well. And that'll be on my website, which is chriswrites.com.
I will. Are you going to have a specific link for the Kickstarter itself?
At some point, yeah.
You will? Okay.
I'm not sure what date it goes live. It'll be somewhere around September 30th, October 1st.
So, Chris, where can folks find you out there on the interwebs if they're interested in what you've got to say?
They should go to chriswrites.com, K-R-I-S, writes.com. And then that will lead them to all kinds of different stuff. Excellent.
I've absolutely humbled and honored to have you on the show. This has been great. It's really, really surreal and strange for me to be talking to you. It's been a great year for the podcast, and I know it's not the end of year, and I'm kind of feeling like I'm about to make an end of year comment, but you've really made 2019 for me for Horrible Writing. It feels complete. This was really cool. And for you to share this much about your personal journey, with all the folks and helping them deal with some stuff that they're facing, it just really means a lot, and it really speaks to your character, Chris, and I really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate it.
This has been Horrible Writing, and hopefully after this episode, you suck less than you did at the beginning. I am Paul Sading, your host extraordinaire. You can find me over on the Twitterverse at Writing Horrible, and over at paulsading.com/horrible-writing. Until next time, suck less.